Welcome everyone to the last panel of the day. After this, there will be a wrap-up, so don't go back after the panel, stay for the wrap-up. In this panel, we are going to talk about the sustainability angle and the emergence of new technology and how that is likely to transform the society. So the panel title is A Runway to a More Sustainable Society, the Future of Green Aviation Technology. It's about 1 hour in duration, and we have esteemed panelists, really well accomplished panelists in this panel. So I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Naveed Hussain, who is the Boeing CTO. He has PhD from Stanford University in aeronautics engineering. Our next panelist is Subramanian. Probably the reason I got the moderator job is I could pronounce her last name without any problem. Uma is the CEO of Aero Technologies, who is focused on bringing the next generation of air travel. So basically, she's forming an entirely new airline. She's also executive board member of Volocopter, and she has MBA from Harvard and aerospace engineering degree from Michigan. And the last panelist is Graham Warwick, very accomplished journalist and managing editor focused on technology at Aviation Week. It's sort of an honor to get Graham interview you and have him write about our work in the Aviation Week. And today, I feel I have the honor to hosting him in this panel. So everyone, welcome our panelists. We're really delighted to have this panel and excited about the discussion that we are going to have. The panel is organized in a way that Naveed Hussain will start off and give a 6-minute or so brief overview. Then we'll turn to Uma, who will talk about her experience and how lessons learned. And then we'll go to Graham for his reflections from the aviation ecosystem. So welcome everybody. Naveed, over to you.
Thank you, PK. And thank you for having me on the panel. Thank you to NASA for hosting this great event. It's an honor to be a part of it. It's an honor to be on this panel with Uma and Graham, and just really thrilled to be talking about a very important topic with you all today. You know, as PK mentioned, we are on a journey to decarbonize aviation. And we have done some stepping back, if you will, at Boeing around the topic of sustainability. And the first thing we ask is, what is sustainability? And we think about it in a classic sort of ESG framework. Certainly the environment is a huge part of our focus, and certainly where we want to generate outcomes in this framework. And that topic, of course, consists of things like climate change and emissions, energy usage. There's a very important social component of sustainability around human rights. You know, we're seeing this in the global stage, today, and with very difficult events and news. Employee safety and well-being, diversity and equity, the engagement with the communities that we operate in, you know, things like training and education. And finally, governance, you know, the business practices and the ethics on how that it underpins everything we do at Boeing and in our business. Really our management approach, how we think about managing risk, and then think about the measures on how we measure the performance, the metrics on how we measure the performance of our company. If I could please go to the next chart, let me dive in to, I'll say, our vision, our strategy on sustainable aerospace on the road to a 2050 net zero. And so how do we do that? there are really four pillars to this approach, this strategy. First, we think about fleet renewal, where the products that we're building today are 15 to 25% more efficient than the products that they will replace. And as we think about the installed base and the opportunity to support our customers and our communities and all the stakeholders that we have around fleet renewal. Second, we think about operational efficiency, that the airspace management, the technologies, the tools, the systems that are in place that can be used, modified, upgraded down the road to unlock a high degree of efficiency and ultimately a large outcome on measures of sustainability, just the efficient use of the airspace. Third, renewable energy. Here we have investments, partnerships such as Sky Energy in the area of sustainable aviation fuels. And that's certainly our focus. When we think about a path to a sustainable aviation future, PK, it's important to get started today. What can we think about certainly what we need to do down the road, but we also think about what we can do today and in the near term. And in that area, sustainable aviation fuels presents, we think, the largest near-term opportunity. And then finally, the topic of advanced technology. In many ways, that sort of underpins all of these pillars. And here we think about the enablers, advanced materials, the digital engineering environment. We think about advanced propulsion systems, perhaps novel methods of propulsion, whether it's electric or hybrid propulsion, and how that propulsion system is integrated into the airframe in a novel manner. And we think even broader about the configuration of the platform itself. So that's just a quick intro to the topic, PK, and how we're approaching this from Boeing.
Well, that's great. Well, I really very much appreciate your expansive definition of sustainability that includes environment, social, and governance, and various aspects of that, including fleet, operations, renewable energy, and the technology that will keep us going further and faster and places where we haven't been before through aviation. So this is great. I really appreciate that expansive definition. Now over to you, Uma. You have quite a bit of lessons that from your various years of dedicated ops in the Brazil to running things at ACube as well as Volocopter Executive Board, and now running an entirely brand new airline. So look forward to hearing your thoughts, Uma.
Thank you very much, PK, and thank you very much for the invitation. As Naveed said, it's an honor to be asked to be part of this illustrious panel. I have an interesting perspective in that I come at sustainable aviation as an operator. As PK mentioned, I am the CEO of a startup airline called Aero Technologies, which is focused on short-haul regional transportation for premium travelers. The market segment is particularly interesting because we were building a business for consumers that have a materially higher willingness to pay than kind of conventional air carriers. What that allows us to do is to really bake sustainability into the equation from the start. As Naveed mentioned, next generation aircraft are expected to be 15 to 25% better from an emissions perspective than today's legacy fleet. But the real advances and improving on the 25% is going to come when one of these novel new propulsion technologies is really deployed at scale, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's electric or whether it's hybrid electric or fuel cell. When someone manages to create a vehicle that has an alternative propulsion system in it, that's when the radical change happens. So at Aero, we think 2040 entry into service, which is the likely expected date for anything that would that would provide the kind of range that we need, which is anything over 1,000 nautical miles, is likely to be entry into service in 2040. So we think that's too long to wait. So at Aero, we signed up to the COP26 targets, but we are actually aiming to be net neutral next year, both through a combination of carbon offsets, but we are leaning in really heavily into the SAF space. We have committed to buy biofuels out of all the airports where we can get it today. So we buy biofuels in Van Nuys, in San Francisco. We are the launch customer for biofuels at Farnborough Airport in the UK. And these biofuels are available in very limited quantities today. And one of the joys of operating out of smaller airports is that they can actually meet our needs today. So we're really excited about the direction that we're going in on the sustainability side. As PK also mentioned in the introduction, I sit on the board of Volocopter and think a lot about battery electric aircraft and the corresponding power density required to create both short haul battery electric flight and also much longer haul, and have a lot of interesting conversations and have been looking at a lot of kind of upcoming battery manufacturers, and so happy to engage on that topic as well. I'm really excited about the direction the industry is going. As Naveed mentioned, SAF is kind of the clear answer today, but we've got kind of an urgency, and there's a lot of momentum in the industry, both to fund new types of technologies, but also to really push the envelope on what's possible today. So I am excited to engage and look forward to have a fruitful conversation.
Thank you, Uma, for that perspective from running an airline and near-term, balancing the near-term priorities and as well as looking out for long-term. So that's a really good understanding there. So thank you for that insight. And now over to you, Graham. You have seen quite a bit of exciting things going on, and you keep up with the ecosystem. So let's love to hear about your reflections.
So thank you for inviting me. So you've asked for reflections. So I'm going to go back a ways, back to when I first left university and went and joined an aircraft manufacturer. But I didn't stay an engineer long. I became a journalist very quickly, and then I've been doing that for the last more than 40 years. So if you think about the timing, I missed the 50s and the 60s, which was really the heady days of the technical exuberance of the aerospace industry that felt it could do anything, it could do anything was possible. And as we know, there were many things that weren't possible, and there were some pretty spectacular failures, but the industry thought they could do everything. I moved to the US in 91, and literally within a year or two, they cancelled the X-30 National Aerospace plane, which was really the last gasp of that technological arrogance that was the military industrial complex at the time. And it was replaced by more of a sort of a risk-averse approach, a more incremental improvement approach for the next many, many years. Now, if you fast forward to now, I am literally the busiest I've ever been at trying to cover the technologies that are influencing aerospace. I've never experienced a time like this, and a lot of the people I talk to have never experienced a time like this. And it's a very different time to the 50s and the 60s. In the 50s and 60s, all of that technological progress was inside the skunk works or behind the walls of a corporate laboratory or something like that. Today, it's been driven by startups and venture capitalists. It's happening in public because they want to show progress. They want to raise funding. So we're seeing the progress as it's happening. And that leads me to I was trying to find a way to explain what I think could happen. And I'm a fan of Pink Floyd, so I came up with the prism. And so if you look at this prism, if you're showing the slide, if you look at the prism, we have what is commercial aviation today, which is kind of monolithic. It's a sort of one size fits all, different sizes of airplanes, but they all kind of look the same. They all use jet fuel and et cetera, et cetera. And we just have different ranges, different sizes, different things like that. And then we have underneath this, at the bottom of the pyramid here, we have all of these technologies that are coming into aerospace. Most of them, 90% of them, are are being driven by other industries. So they all have their own pace of development, and it's not being set by aviation. They're coming into aviation and they're influencing aviation as they're brought in. You can see the examples there. And one possible result of this is that this monolithic commercial aviation that we understand today with the big airlines and the feeder airlines becomes something very, very different, very diverse and differentiated. And you've got all the possibilities there, from urban delivery drones and air taxis, middle mile logistics, intercity flying, all the way up to supersonic, hypersonic, transatlantic, transoceanic flight, and space access, both delivering cargo via space or even passengers via space. And it's kind of inevitable, because commercial aviation, as we know today, is built on jet fuel. It's an incredible energy source, and it allows us to do many things. As we go forward and as we try to get sustainable, try to find a replacement for that, not just a direct replacement, but really true zero emissions replacements. There is no one system that's going to work for every aspect of aviation. So you necessarily see aviation start to form into discrete layers that are tied to the capabilities of the propulsion. So pure electric propulsion, short range, smaller aircraft. Hydrogen electric, you get a little bit bigger. Hydrogen combustion, maybe you can get a bit longer range. And then you get into how do we do the true long range commercial, high capacity commercial aviation. And then how do we make hypersonics and sustainable, or space access, etc. So you are going to see this differentiation, and it's driven largely by the need to be sustainable and the fact that the technologies no one technology can deliver everything. So there is another way to look at this. If we can go to the second slide. And this is the spectrum of sort of aviation as we kind of look at it today. And I've kind of divided it up. So reinvent, that's really not an aviation market today. That is urban, that's drone delivery, that's urban air taxis, sub-regional taxis. The market there, aviation is trying to get into a road transport market. It's trying to take passengers away from cars, buses, trains, and get them in to fly for many good reasons, time, etc. But if we don't do it sustainably, we just add to aviation's sustainability problem. So that has to be fundamentally, from day one, a sustainable, zero, if possible, emissions, because we are creating a new aviation market. You've then got this revitalized, which is really what we understand as regional airlines, except for over the past few years, we got used to regional airlines flying bigger and bigger airplanes and not going to as many small cities as they used to do. So we've lost a lot of service. So a lot of people working on these new types of electric aircraft and hydrogen electric aircraft and hybrid electric aircraft see this as a ready market to go into aircraft that are cheaper to operate, so ticket prices will be lower, are quieter and cleaner, so can go into local communities and start to restore the connectivity that we've lost, and then expand it into a whole new network. But again, it has to be sustainable in the sense of it has to be quiet, it has to be clean, it has to be efficient so that it's low cost, if that's going to happen. And then renew is kind of what Naveed was talking about. We have got to take this vast majority of commercial aviation, which is narrow bodies, wide bodies, thousands of miles range, and we've got to find a way to get those more efficient, more sustainable, not just in how they fly, but in use less energy during construction, use less resources during construction, and use less energy as we use them. And all of that is goodness to aviation, because that brings prices down, that brings costs of operating down. So there's a real driver to do that. And then the third thing is this reimagine, which is really, it's the areas of aviation we've always wanted to do, but we've never been able to get them to do. So we tried to do supersonics. It drank lots of fuel, made lots of noise, and was great to look at, but it wasn't a commercial success. We are starting to look again at supersonics. It has to be sustainable. It has to be, otherwise it's just not going to be acceptable to not to the people who can afford to fly in it, but to the people around it. Airports are going to say, no, you name it, it's just never going to happen. It has to be sustainable from day one. And then as we talk about hypersonics or using space for more than just putting satellites into orbit, sustainability in all its forms, all the forms that Naveed talked about, from how you design it through to how you get rid of it at the end of its life cycle, you have to think of all of those, because otherwise we are just going to make aviation's problem bigger. So that kind of, to me, encapsulates why sustainability is such a big issue and why it's such a multifaceted issue and why there are so many ways we can tackle it. This is not a one golden bullet solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. That's great. I really appreciate and like the model, the framework you put together: reinvent, revitalize, renew, and reimagine. So it's a really good way to frame where the priorities are and how things are different in different categories. So that's really great. So thank you again for your initial reflections and thoughts. So let's go through some questions, and I will try to straddle back and forth between my prepared questions and the questions from the audience. For those who are in the audience, please feel free to send in your questions on the conference IO, as well as rank up and down the questions that exist already. So I'm going to start with a little bit simpler question. Obviously, you all have really great experience, and you've seen lots of intricacies related to aviation and the challenges and positives. What are you each excited about related to aviation enterprise as of now, today, pretty much? So Naveed, you start with you, Uma, and then Graham.
Yeah, PK, that's a great question. And, I sometimes think about adding to the question, which is, what is there not to be excited about, in aviation right now? Because there's a tremendous amount of change in our industry. It is a great time to be starting out a career in aerospace. Maybe that's always true, but I, in my 30+ year career, have not seen this high of several kinds of ingredients. One is the multidisciplinary nature of the industry continues to grow. If you look at Graham's chart, when you think about artificial intelligence, you think about autonomy, you think about machine learning, then you think about advanced material systems, you think about production systems and factories of the future, and the end-to-end life cycle of these products, from early stage concept and configuration design to in-fleet service to ultimately retiring these assets in a sustainable way. There's something in here. We sort of have to redefine what is an aerospace engineer, because we work with software experts, we work with data scientists, we work with chemical engineers and chemists. I mean, I couldn't even list all of the various disciplines. So I'm excited about the rate of change that this industry continues to experience, and the opportunity that exists, not just for one narrow niche of interest, but a broad range. And the common denominator in all of it is the purpose that people have in this industry around connecting people together, around protecting societies and communities and allies, and really exploring the universe and beyond.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Naveed. Over to you, Uma.
Thanks, PK. I am most excited about the momentum in the industry, and the fact that there are enormous sources of capital flowing into this industry from unexpected places. I have the benefit of not only seeing Aero's fundraise and the interest that's coming in from really interesting places, banks, funds that would not ordinarily have really thought about aviation as a core part of their portfolio, and then also kind of looking and seeing like where the capital is coming in into the eVTOL space. It's not from traditional sources, and I'm really excited about the fact that there is so much momentum from outside the industry that it's like really forcing change. If you think back a few years, I think Uber did more to kind of catalyze our industry than any industry player has ever done with Uber Elevate. And the repercussions of that catalyst are still being felt. Like there's still an enormous kind of momentum and energy in the space. We saw 3 startups go public in this space with Joby and Lilium and Archer, and it's just really interesting to see how that kind of external momentum is flowing in. The other thing that's really interesting about our industry, particularly I've run consumer businesses in this space. Before consumer businesses, I was in the OEM and tier 1 and tier 2 supply chain business. And transitioning to become an operator and actually interacting with customers on a daily basis has been really enlightening. Everyone has an opinion about air transportation. Everyone. And mostly, if they've flown commercial in the last couple of years, it's been bad, right? And so as an operator, what's been really, really fun is like engaging with them on a very granular level to say to radically rethink the passenger experience. Like it's so commoditized across the major carriers. And like what we're trying to do is radically rethink that proposition. And the expectation of the customer, right? Particularly the services in the ground transportation world are so personalized, right? Like Uber is a very personal experience, and they have so much data on you, and they know what your travel patterns are, and they serve you content that's relevant to you. And the airlines, they at scale don't do that. And so there's an opportunity here for like a radical rethink and a radical personalization of the air experience for customers. And that really excites me. That's really fun. And it's just fun. Like, I know that we have a lady named Julie who flies with us back and forth LA to Aspen every week. And I know she likes Fiji water, right? That's the level of data that we can have about our customers and radically rethink this kind of experience. And I think that passenger, making the stakeholder a key part of the decision making is really interesting. I think Graham said like in the 50s and 60s, innovation came from skunkworks, and now it's public, and the public has a point of view, and that's something that I think we should really hear about.
Well, that's a really great insight about the customization and the funding that is coming in. So Graham, over to you. I'll just warn you that I was born in the 60s, so I have no idea what you're talking about. So.
Okay, I think of aviation. If you look back at aviation, it kind of has always been remote. You go to the airport to fly. It's not in your backyard. It may fly over you, but it's not literally. You're not living next to aviation. And for the longest time, it was aspirational. I can save up and go fly somewhere. I can go to Bali for my holidays, or I can go to. If you're in the UK, go for Burnley for your holidays or something like that. But as over the years, and as Uma pointed out, that aspiration has got eroded to the point now where it isn't an aspiration to go fly with the airlines. It's almost like a burden to go fly with the airlines. But so what I get really excited about in all of this shape of technology is the chance for aviation to actually touch people's lives, everybody's life in some way, and for aviation to just become part of our lives. So you got, whether it's delivery drones or an air taxi or a personalized airline service or whatever it is, I think that all these technologies really have the opportunity to make aviation an immediate, not remote, and a beneficial, not burdensome aspect of life. Now that does, back to our subject of our thing, that means it has to be sustainable, because as Uma says, the public has an opinion. So if they're going to get close to aviation has to be ready for that. It has to have an answer to all the questions, and it has to be able to put forward a case that using aviation is to the benefit over using some other, or just not doing something.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you for that, Graham. So now the next question, I'll start with Naveed. So obviously Boeing has been very successful enterprise for quite some time, and things are changing, as you pointed out, Uma pointed out, and Graham pointed out, and they are changing. And Graham mentioned this vividly, that things are changing because of outside aero developments. Whether it's electrification and digitization and autonomy and such. Do you see that as part of this change, is the inherent aviation aeroscience changing it, and how much of that is being changed, or is it really all these other confluence of technologies and user preferences and digitization that Uma talked about, that access to the user preferences and data such that that's one driving the needs and future aviation?
Great question, PK, and I think of this kind of as an and, not necessarily an or, around aerosciences or other. It really is all kind of, sort of compounding and these changes. And as technology continues to accelerate in places like electrification, in places like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the pieces and building blocks for autonomy, these are like X factors for our industry. I mean, it all ultimately is still driven by physics, things like aerosciences. I mean, that part won't change. But in terms of the how, whether it's the design, the configuration, or the operation, whether it's in the production system or in the sustainment system, there's a tremendous amount of change, and I think it's an and, PK.
Interesting. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Uma, over to you. You sort of mentioned, obviously, the preferences and consumer preferences, making sure that the traveling is a richer experience. Of course, first priority is safety for any airline that you start, but beyond that, then you differentiate yourself with some key factors as opposed to the other airlines. So how do you prioritize things that you want to focus on beyond safety? Safety given, after that, what's your next 2-3 priorities when you're starting a new airline that will remain sustainable and competitive as compared with the other options that exist today?
Yeah, so at Aero, we're really trying to bridge a gap in the market between kind of commercial first and business and private. And so we're going after a very premium customer, right? And that customer has certain expectations about the seamlessness of the experience. And so what we really solve for is customer experience, right? I no disrespect to American Airlines, but I use the example that I was concierge key on American Airlines for 5 years, and 1 year I stopped traveling, and I got dropped to coached by the bathroom, and that is like it's a very myopic way of looking at your customer and not realizing you don't look at the customer as a holistic person or as a human, and you're just very transactional about how you deal with that customer. And what we've realized, like, we talk to 95% of our very, very loyal customers on the phone. And there's some things about like the human experience of aviation that needs to change, and it needs to change radically, and people are willing to pay a premium for it. And so at Aero, that's really what we're focused on. We're really focused on a radically better product and a radically better experience. It's much more sort of a luxury brand promise than than kind of an air travel promise, right? And what we realize is like the great question for us is like, how do you scale that, and how do you actually at some point move that down market to address a much bigger TAM? But we're really thinking about that fine experience, right? Like really building something that that customers value, in the same way that in the hotel world, there's space in the market for Courtyard and Marriott and JW, and there's space for the limited edition and the collection, and then at the other end is the Aman hotels. In the aviation, you've got the kind of low-cost carriers, you've got the ULCCs, then the low-cost carriers, then the kind of national carriers, and then there's a big gap, and then there's private. And we think that represents an opportunity space for something different and for like a radically better product experience.
Well, great. Yeah, that's a really interesting insight about differentiating with customer experience. Now, Graham, to you, the question about 50s and 60s and the excitement that you had experienced back then, and now you feel that there is similar things happening, and other panelists also mentioned that. And the question is sort of, this is coming from the audience, is worded a little bit negatively, but it talked about basically lots of lessons learned through failures and learning in that era. Do you see anything like that happening in the current setup and the ecosystem, with so many different things emerging, trying will there be some successful, some not so successful adventures?
Oh yeah, I mean, we are going to see failures. I mean, we've seen our first, one of our first publicly acknowledged crashes of an eVTOL air taxi prototype flying unmanned, so we're going to see technical issues, we're going to see financial issues, we're going to see a shakeout of this industry. It's just the natural progression. If you go back, I'm not this old. If you go back to the 30s, after in the exuberant 30s, there were hundreds of aircraft companies that formed and then largely died out before the Second World War. After the Second World War, hundreds of aviation companies were formed, largely died out before we got to where we are. And then it got to the jet age, it got kind of expensive, and so it just got narrower and narrower and narrower. We're going back to that hundreds of companies, out of which some small number will come. But it's wrong to think that these new companies are not going about it the right way. There are some that are not doing it the right way, but many of them are. And what they're able to do that the larger companies have not been able to achieve through just years, decades of experience, and the fact that they're working with very, very large airplanes, is that these guys start small. They like the aircraft that crashed, all of their testing has been unmanned, full-scale aircraft, but unmanned. They're able to do that because it's not a huge airplane. So they are failing fast and learning fast in the early days before they get to certification. So that airplane that crashed was not a certification prototype. It was a technology demonstrator. It's going to inform the design of their certification aircraft. There's another company two companies, the airplane burned when the batteries caught fire on the ground. Both those aircraft have been redesigned. They've learned from the experience. They were unmanned demonstrators. So there is a piece of this moving fast thing that's working. The other thing that I think that we shouldn't forget is the regulator is still there, right? So I mean, all of these companies have to get past the arse of the FAA before they do it, and I am incredibly impressed by the way the regulators have adapted to the speed of technology, and it may not be as fast as some of these companies want to move, but they have moved faster than we could ever believe a regulator could move. And we are just, as we speak today, we are moving into that hard phase of turning all of this hype and promise into a certifiable product. We're going to see these certifiable prototypes start to fly in the next year or two. The really hard work of qualification testing and analysis is all just getting underway. The regulator has not taken their eye off the ball. They have moved quickly to create a framework that enables innovation, but they haven't taken their eye off the ball. There have been other external events that meant that they've increased their oversight in many cases. But it's worth pointing out that all of these companies are already under the microscope because these are all new designs. These are things that have never been done before. The FAA wasn't going to just tick the box on one of these airplanes because it's never certified one of these before. It's going to focus because it has to get it right, because there are many, many more that will follow. So I think I'm actually quite encouraged both by the fact that these fast-moving startups are getting serious about being aerospace companies, but also that this slow-moving regulator is getting serious about trying to adapt to the pace of technology, which benefits everybody. Boeing wants to put technology into its airplanes faster than it can at the moment. UMA wants new sustainable airplanes onto the market faster than we can do at the moment. We've got to get these two pieces of the equation more aligned, and then we will get results that might actually happen in time to get to that 2050 goal. Is net zero 2050.
Can I just build on something that Graham said that is pretty important here? One of the things that I said I was excited about was the availability of capital, but one of the things I'm most concerned about is the availability of capital, because to Graham's point, in order for us to accelerate the rate of development and for more than just a couple of these small companies to survive to get bought by Boeing and Airbus, there needs to be growth stage capital available, and that's a real concern, right? So like the actual, when I was kind of diligencing a bunch of these guys to see who I would work with, one of the real things that struck me was that people have not thought through industrialization. And this is where the very light jet market went bad, right? Eclipse was like, hey, I'll deliver a sub-$1 million jet, which was fine. They could build a sub-$1 million prototype. But when it came to actually industrialize that vehicle, it was 2 to 3x the cost. And there was no market for that product at that price. And that is the risk here as well, right? So we have big promises for the electric VTOL space, but when it comes to actually build and industrialize these vehicles, there's very little kind of institutional experience outside of Boeing and Airbus and now Embraer and Bombardier. But like, there's been such intense consolidation in the industry that experience does not reside in a lot of places. And so for me, that's the big risk here to this space. And so like, really starting to think, like, I know we like, particularly at the companies that I work with, we think a lot about like, what can we learn from automotive to kind of shorten the timeline and bring these things to market. And PK, you and I talk a lot about supply chain and like, how do we actually, foster the development of an ecosystem in a way that doesn't result in sort of a duopoly again in this space. And so that for me is the big thing. I think there's a lot to do to transition from, on some level, anyone can build a flying prototype, but to actually then take that and build it into a production scale vehicle that can meet a 10 to the 9th redundancy requirement is super hard, super hard. And so super hard and super capital intensive. And the question is, where's the money going to come from is a very real one. Not to bring the enthusiasm down, but just a minor reality check.
No, that's great. I think that's a good pros and cons of the capital in the market. Yeah. So in terms of sustainability, each one of you may have slightly different variations of sustainability definition. So let's start with maybe you, Naveed. I mean, you talked about ESG as part of the sustainability grand framework, but obviously there are some trade-offs in there. Not everything is equal, and some things can conflict with each other. What are the sort of top, if we were to ask each one of you, what are the top 5 goals of sustainability for the Boeing Corporation, for the Aero Technologies, Uma, and then Graham, what do you think the ecosystem goals should be? And are we aligned as an industry at large that sustainability seems to be, and the number of goals inside sustainability seems to be consistent across the board? So let's start with you, Naveed, then Uma, and then Graham.
Yeah, PK, I think your question is getting at an important matter, which is kind of focus, and sort of what do you, how are you going to move this needle in a meaningful way, certainly in the near term, but also in the midterm, and then also thinking about that long term, that the road to a net zero 2050. And when we think about that ESG framework, we don't necessarily think of trade-offs in between them. We think of them really all as equally vital to a sustainable future, whether it's certainly the environment, the social piece, and then it has to be underpinned by governance, and that gets into ethical business practices. So we don't necessarily see any kind of trade-offs there, PK, but when we think about priorities, we think a lot about things around environmental impact in terms of where we're active, and that is things like sustainable aviation fuels. We have key investments in urban air mobility joint ventures like WISC, where we are developing an all-electric autonomous aircraft. And we are also partnered with NASA in very exciting technologies, from advanced configurations like a truss brace wing to many enablers. How do you build a high aspect ratio thin wing like that, from a material systems point of view, and a systems integration point of view, from actuators to materials systems. So when we think about kind of how we are building this roadmap, so to speak, it really is around the enabling technology, acting now with investments in sustainable aviation fuel companies, and the technology and path to meet our commitment of every Boeing aircraft built in 2030 will be able to operate with 100% sustainable aviation fuel.
That's great. Yeah, that's encouraging to hear that, Naveed. Over to you, Ma. What from the operator's perspective? Obviously, there is a push to get to market, provide the best service, and so on and so forth. So, how do you balance that with the sustainability aspects?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges for the industry has been that margins historically, kind of in the traditional business, have been really thin. And so anything that drives, and SAF today, it's anywhere from in the UK, right? It's about £3 more per liter for SAF than it is for conventional Jet A at Farnborough. In the US, it's like $1.50 more per gallon for SAF than it is for conventional Jet A. And so when you are an operator and you're operating on razor thin margins, it's very hard to kind of swallow that and to really deploy it at scale. That said, the airlines have committed to moving in this direction, and people like United are doing a lot more on the SAF space. But there's just a volume problem, right? It's not widely available. So as a startup carrier, which consumes not as much jet fuel as anyone else, and that is charging a materially higher price than what you might see in the market, we're able to kind of manage and roll some of that additional fuel cost into our operating costs, and we're still able to cover it and still be profitable as a business. And so for us, that was what really excited me about this market segment. I'm an aerospace technologist at heart. I'm not a premium traveler generally. And so for me, what was really exciting was about we're building a business that is going to be able to take, and we're building a very loyal kind of premium customer base that is going to be able to support the integration of next generation electric airplanes into the fleet in 10 years time when they're available, or 20 years time. And so we're really thinking about sustainability. Since we're starting from scratch, we're thinking about sustainability today. So, really thinking about how do we offset all of our kind of carbon emissions in the short term. SAF is a big part of it, but we're also thinking about, working with some of our investors on carbon offset at scale. And then also thinking about like sustainability as Naveed's slide said, is so much more than just kind of your carbon emission. It's about like, what is your interaction with the environment? And I think we're really focused on being good corporate stewards.
So let me go to the next question. Unless, Graham, you want to add anything to that aspect of sustainability?
No, I would just say that I tend to look at sustainability. I was only an engineer for a couple of years at the beginning of my career, but I tend to look at it as an engineering problem. It's a bit like when cyber vulnerability came up, the aerospace industry kind of approached it like a safety problem. They knew they kind of knew how to approach it and they approached it as an engineering problem. And I think that's what sustainability, most of the things you need for sustainability are all goodness for the operator. It's all about, less use of energy, less use of resources, lower cost, less blah, blah, blah. I will have a word of caution about sustainable aviation fuels. And this is only a caveat if we really get to where climate change is a huge social problem. I don't think sustainable aviation fuels is going to cut the mustard for the airlines, because you're still emitting. You still have tailpipe emissions. You're just using an accounting process to say that you're at least some in some cases all of that carbon is being absorbed somewhere else. I'm not sure how well that's going to play if things go very bad. So I don't think we should take our eye off of technologies that truly reduce the actual tailpipe emissions. And that's just one concern I have, that yes, we need to move quickly with SAF, and we need to get 100%. We need to get the synthetic e-kerosenes going and the price start to come down. But we have to remember we will still be emitting at the tailpipe. And at some point, I'm worried that will be a problem we can't make go away.
Yeah, and the answer to that is like radically better battery technology, right? In the short term, that's like, and so like we're seeing.
When is the aviation industry ever going to get its act together in battery technology?
Well, yeah, I was just talking to a very interesting company here in Fremont that's like, well, we can get to 400 watt hours a kilogram, and I was like, cool. We need 800 to 1,000 watt hours a kilogram to get like regional quality sustainable aviation where you can fly 10 people more than 500 nautical miles. Like that's when the game starts to change, right? And everyone's working on fundamentally new battery chemistry. It's just got to go faster, right? If we really want to change the game and have a very kind of transparent conversation, like you need something new. And hydrogen's interesting, but it's fundamentally unstable at room temperature, right? Like you're really going to set fire to that, and with people on it, it's like a very kind of hot, like difficult leap of faith. And so you come back to, okay, then batteries are probably the best alternative, but it needs to be something radically better quickly.
Yeah. And just to add on, PK, if I could, to Uma's point and Graham's, these roadmaps tend to have two axes. One is, of course, time, and then the other one tends to be scale. So when you think about something like all electric, that looks a lot like an urban air mobility kind of platform, something with a limited kind of a payload and a range. But when you start thinking about, more than that, a bigger scale, you might think about electric hybrid when you think about things closer in time, and then when you think about larger scale, that's going to be perhaps a different kind of energy carrier, but then time is going to look quite different. So there's sort of time, and then there's scale.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's really good insight about that. So here is a next question for all of you, really, but this is something that I keep thinking in my own mind is, just using that ESG framework, environment and social aspect, just take the two. I see that a significant portion of world's population still has not, flown. They don't have access to affordable air travel yet, for the most part. And we want every community to be connected and served by aviation that doesn't do harm, creates jobs, changes lifestyle for the better for everyone, like automobile did a long time ago. How do you balance that, right? We want to give access to the aviation very quickly. So unless the battery improves, or we are really getting to the SAF and the emissions at tailpipe or production that are really down in the entire system, right, from start to end, how do you balance that, giving access to the world by aviation and then making sure that there is still big part of the sustainability goal that allows you to grow without creating more damage? Or is that a step function? Is it not a linear function? Some technology advancements have to jump up to be able to meet the sustainability aspects at the same time give access to the world.
So maybe I could take a punt to that. The reality is that the demand is there today, right? Like, so I have a chart in my Series B pitch deck where it basically shows that after every major kind of recessionary period, in this case, this was a response to the COVID complaints, there's a dip for a period of time, and then the slope of the curve from a passenger volume basis comes back steeper, right? And so there's latent, it is human nature to want to go places and human nature to want to go places by air, right? So some of my kind of climate activist friends are like, how can you run an airline? I'm like, because people want to go places. Like, no matter what you say, people are going to want to get on a plane and go to Aspen or Cabo or Hawaii, right? And that's just the reality of it. And as air travel and these ULCCs become more prevalent everywhere, it's just one of those things that's gonna increase, right? And if you look at the IATA forecast, passenger volumes are forecast to double in the next 10 years. And so then this, I don't think we have an answer to the how do you make it more sustainable. I think the reality is like the speed of innovation has to speed up. Like there's no, if we really want to build a more sustainable ecosystem, then batteries got to get better faster, and we have to have a system whereby we can, wholesale replace the propulsion system on some legacy platforms within, with a hybrid electric propulsor of some kind. And so you're kind of at this place where like, okay, if we know the problem's going to get worse, then we should probably move more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
would
that's
just say,
no, that's a good point. I'll just say, I was just visiting India a few weeks ago, and then I've seen many of my nieces, nephews, and some of my friends haven't even flown by air. They have not experienced the magic, and I think, I would love for them to see that, without feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, so I mean, Boeing's own forecasts will tell you that I think some huge proportion of China, some huge proportion of India's never flown. That's all untapped demand that will be tapped at some point as standards of living increase and people get. So we have to be ready for that. So that's where SAF comes in. You really need to get SAF out, and that's not a technical problem. We can make SAF. I mean, I could take my table here and turn it into jet fuel. I mean, I could take almost anything in this room and turn it into jet fuel. It's the cost.
You're hired, Graham.
But so we have really got one voice to all the governments saying a financial structure for jet fuel, for SAF, that incentivizes the production, gets it out as fast as we can, so that we can do that. We can actually start to field SAF as the demand comes back and goes back up again. But that is a cost issue, and it's a government financial incentive type of thing like that. At the same time, we have to make sure that anything we do to bring new people to aviation doesn't add to our emissions. So everything we do at the bottom end has to be electric or something that doesn't pollute. And if we're going to go the other way, if we're going to go higher and faster, whatever like that, we have to do that really carefully as well. But the answer is SAF initially, but that's a financial issue.
And just to add on, PK, if I could, Graham is right on.
Please.
What he's getting into is the importance of public-private partnership on this journey. There's not any one, silo that gets us to where we need to be in aviation. This is something that requires public-private partnerships at scale.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we need everyone lining up together, public, private, and industry together, maybe philanthropists. I have this 4P model, public-private philanthropy partnership, to working together to change the world, obviously. So this is great. One more question. On the green evolution, it took a long time for car companies to get here, and now they are full steam ahead with the batteries and so on and so forth. Is aviation likely to reach that goal faster than other means of transportation, or will there be challenges to the aviation? It seems like it took a long time for cars to get there, but somehow there is a different expectation from aviation that we need to get aviation much faster, even though aviation contributes very little to the, as compared with the rest of the challenges with emissions and environment.
Well, I think people have been working on it for a long, long time, right? Like we think Joby is new to the market, but they've been working on their battery-powered airplane since 2009, right? And so it's not anything new or novel or different in that sense. It's just the people working on battery-powered cars for years and years and years. I mean, Tesla came to market in 2004 with the Roadster, so it's just a long road. It's just we've had a lot of time to think about it, and the clarion call for urgent action is much more urgent now than it was 10 years ago. And so the pressure is like, it kind of needs to be fixed faster than what it's being fixed at, is the basic point.
And like you said, PK, challenges are not new to this industry. When you compare a commercial jet today to what the previous generation or the generation before then looked like, you're seeing a dramatic change in efficiency by any measure. And so we need to stay on that curve. And to Uma's point, we got to speed up, not slow down. So challenge is not new to this industry. And this journey is going to have its fair share of them.
Graham, you're muted.
I had to be the one that did it. Okay, so aviation as we know it, global mass transportation came with the 747, right? That was what really opened the world to aviation. And if you look at electric cars, it's not the Tesla Roadster, it's the Tesla Model 3 that really changed everything, because that is a kind of a mass market car, expensive mass market car. So what you're seeing is all the manufacturers are basically going electric. That is really hard to replicate in aviation because we have such a high bar to meet, which is a 7,000 mile range, 250 seat, whatever, or something like that. It's going to be really hard. So it has to do it as sectors, which is the first time the industry really has to think about maybe we need to subdivide. And that makes it very hard to speak with one voice when you've got a piece of the industry that thinks that's the way to go, another piece that thinks that's the way to go. And we're doing that at the moment. I'm watching it. I've got the hydrogen guys fighting with the SAF guys. I've got the hydrogen electric guys fighting with the battery guys. Because at the moment, again, as Naveed said, there is no one answer. Aviation needs multiple answers, and they need them all to be prioritized at the same time. And that's not what happened with electric. Electric turned because they got to a critical mass of something that just said, hey, we could just go electric. Aviation is never going to get any. Aviation as a single thing is never going to get to that critical mass, but individual sectors might. But then we're going to have to start thinking that way, and we don't at the moment. We tend to have this monolithic customers and monolithic manufacturers, and I'm not sure how we get to that tipping point if we stay with that model.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But the tipping point in automotive really was automotive batteries, right? You're down to $100 per kilowatt hour, and that's when it really tipped, was when you got arguably very, very heavy, but very, very power dense and cheap batteries for automotive. And that's the fundamental kicker here, right? We just need them to be power dense and cheap and lightweight, right? That's the tricky part.
Where's the battery 500 for aerospace? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe
this is awesome. This is just terrific conversation. I really appreciate all your insights, and the only promise I want you all to make me is you will come back next year to give more updates on the developments that have happened. So thank you all for coming out, and really enjoyed the conversation. We could have talked for another hour easily, but this is great. And I am going to officially turn this over to